There are moments in Genoa City when power does not announce itself with loud declarations or dramatic confrontations, but instead settles into the silence between decisions, into the spaces where resentment quietly matures into intention. What is unfolding now is not a single conflict but the slow convergence of multiple fractures, each one born from a different wound, each one feeding into a larger, more dangerous design. At the center remains Victor Newman, a man who has spent decades mastering control, shaping outcomes before others even realize they are part of a game. Yet control, no matter how absolute it appears, always creates resistance. And that resistance is no longer isolated. It is beginning to align. Cain has reached a point where patience is no longer a virtue but a liability. He has watched, calculated, and endured long enough to understand that Victor's greatest strength is not just his power, but the fear and loyalty that power generates. Breaking Victor, therefore, cannot be about confrontation. It must be about erosion. Cain's strategy is not to strike directly, but to destabilize the relationships that sustain Victor's influence, to create doubt where there was once certainty, to turn proximity into vulnerability. And for that, he needs someone who exists both inside and outside the core of that power structure. Holden is that person. The approach is deliberate, almost surgical. Cain does not present his plan as revenge, even though it is rooted in years of suppressed frustration. He frames it as opportunity, as inevitability, as a necessary shift in balance. He offers Holden not just wealth, but significance. A chance to step out of the margins and into a position where his choices carry weight. But beneath that offer lies something far more unsettling. Cain is not simply recruiting an ally. He is attempting to recruit a conscience that he can gradually reshape, a man whose hesitation can be reframed as strategic caution rather than moral resistance. Holden feels the pull immediately, and that is precisely what terrifies him. Because the offer makes sense. It aligns with ambitions he has never fully admitted, with a desire to prove that he is more than a secondary figure in someone else's narrative. Yet every logical argument collapses when it collides with one undeniable truth: Claire. She is not just a complication, she is the line he cannot easily cross. The idea of participating in a plan that targets her grandfather, that potentially uses her as an unwitting source of leverage, forces Holden into a state of internal conflict that is both paralyzing and revealing. He begins to understand that this is not a choice between right and wrong, but between two different versions of himself, one driven by ambition, the other anchored by something far more fragile and far more real. What makes Holden's position even more volatile is that hesitation, in a plan like Cain's, is not neutral. It is a weakness that can be exploited or eliminated. Cain begins to recognize this, and instead of pushing harder, he adapts. He applies pressure in subtler ways, introducing scenarios, hypotheticals, carefully crafted arguments that slowly chip away at Holden's resistance. He reframes the narrative, suggesting that this is not about harming Claire, but about protecting a future where she is no longer controlled by Victor's influence. It is manipulation at its most refined, not forcing a decision, but reshaping the context in which that decision is made. Meanwhile, Claire moves through her own dilemma, unaware that she has already become a central piece in a game she did not agree to play. Her struggle appears, on the surface, to be about career and loyalty, about whether she should step into a role at Chancellor and support her family's legacy. But beneath that question lies something far more complex. Claire is beginning to question not just where she belongs, but what belonging actually requires. Supporting Victor and her mother is not a neutral act. It is a declaration, a commitment to a system that operates on control, strategy, and often, emotional detachment. Victoria sees the shift in her daughter, and it unsettles her more than she is willing to admit. She recognizes the same patterns, the same internal negotiations that once defined her own relationship with Victor. Her advice becomes a careful balancing act, guiding without imposing, warning without discouraging. She wants Claire to be strong, but not hardened, to be strategic, but not consumed. Yet she also knows that exposure to Victor's world inevitably changes people. It teaches them to prioritize outcomes over intentions, to see relationships as assets or liabilities, rather than emotional connections. Victoria's greatest fear is not that Claire will fail, but that she will succeed in a way that costs her something irretrievable. As Claire leans closer to a decision, the timing could not be more dangerous. because the very moment she considers stepping into Victor's sphere of influence is the moment that sphere begins to destabilize. Kane's plan continues to evolve. Holden's resistance continues to waver, and elsewhere, another emotional fault line begins to rupture. Jack, already navigating the aftermath of a fractured marriage, makes a choice driven by sincerity but executed without awareness of its consequences. His attempt to reach Diane is not calculated. It is emotional, immediate, fueled by a need to repair something he cannot fully accept as broken. But Diane is not in the same place. Her anger is not just a reaction. It is a defense, a boundary she is not ready to lower. Jack's approach, instead of bridging the gap, becomes an intrusion into a space she is still trying to protect. The rejection is not loud or dramatic, but its impact is profound. It forces Jack into a confrontation with himself, with the realization that intentions do not erase damage, that regret does not guarantee forgiveness. And in that vulnerable space, something begins to shift. The pain does not dissipate. It redirects. It searches for a cause, for a point of origin that can be challenged, confronted, perhaps even punished. And inevitably, that search leads back to Victor. Because in Jack's mind, Victor represents more than a rival. He represents interference, manipulation, the unseen hand that turns personal struggles into strategic disadvantages. Whether or not Victor is directly responsible becomes irrelevant. What matters is that Jack believes he is. And belief, in a world like this, is often more powerful than truth. Seeking out Kyle is not just an emotional refuge. It is the beginning of alignment. Kyle, with his own complexities and unresolved tensions, becomes both a mirror and a catalyst. Through their conversations, Jack begins to articulate something he has not fully acknowledged before, the possibility that reconciliation is no longer the goal, that perhaps the only way to regain control is not to fix what was broken, but to dismantle what contributed to its destruction. This is where the lines begin to blur in ways that are both subtle and irreversible. Jack, who has long positioned himself as a counterbalance to Victor, begins to adopt the very mindset he once resisted. Strategy replaces sincerity. Retaliation replaces reflection. And while he may justify it as necessary, as a response to accumulated grievances, the transformation is undeniable. He is no longer reacting. He is preparing. What makes this moment in Genoa City so volatile is not just the existence of multiple threats, but the way they begin to echo each other. Kane's calculated manipulation, Holden's moral hesitation, Claire's identity crisis, Jack's emotional shift, all of it begins to form a pattern. Different motivations, different entry points, but the same underlying trajectory, a movement toward confrontation, toward a redefinition of power that cannot occur without significant loss. And at the center of it all, Victor stands, not yet defeated, not yet even fully aware of the scale of what is forming around him, but no longer untouchable. The pressure is building, not from a single direction, but from multiple fronts, each one driven by something deeply personal. This is not just a business conflict. It is an emotional reckoning. The most dangerous aspect of what is unfolding is not whether Victor can withstand it, but how far the others are willing to go. Kane risks losing himself in the very tactics he despises. Holden risks sacrificing the one relationship that gives his life meaning. Claire risks stepping into a legacy that could redefine her in ways she cannot yet comprehend. Jack risks becoming indistinguishable from the man he seeks to oppose. In this environment, every decision becomes a test, every alliance, a potential betrayal, every moment of hesitation an opportunity for someone else to gain the upper hand. The illusion of control begins to fracture, revealing a reality where no one is entirely safe, not even those who believe they are orchestrating the outcome. And perhaps the most unsettling truth of all is this: none of them are entirely wrong. Their motivations are understandable, their grievances justified, their desires rooted in something real. But when those motivations collide, when personal pain intersects with strategic ambition, the result is not resolution, it is escalation. Genoa City is not heading toward a single explosive moment. It is moving toward a series of irreversible choices, each one tightening the tension, each one narrowing the path forward. And when the confrontation finally comes, it will not just determine who holds power, it will reveal who each of them has become in the process of trying to take it.